Okay, class, here we have a poem. This is part of the unfamiliar text, so just forget about Mr. Pip for now. We'll talk about Mr. Pip later on. So this is a sample question of what you could get in the examination for unfamiliar texts. So don't forget, we're going to do a practice this term, term 1, on unfamiliar text, but the real deal, so to speak, will be in term 2. In your term 2 examination, you really have to be prepared to write on the unfamiliar text. So once again, the unfamiliar text matches the Green Illusion book. Last year when I was teaching the students, they were very confused as to why they were reading the Green Illusions book. And I had to explain to them many times that the Green Illusions book will help them to understand the unfamiliar texts. So once again, an unfamiliar text is something that you have never ever read before. I have been kind enough to put a couple of pictures down the bottom of this video, and I think those pictures are really helpful for us to understand this poem. However, in the examination you're not going to have any pictures, so I understand that it would be very difficult to really think about what this poem meant without those pictures. So my point is, I'm trying to help you today. Now you can see that I have put in red the writing at the top. In the poem below, the speaker encounters a traveler who recounts a discovery in the desert. So those are your instructions at the top, okay, to help you understand the unfamiliar text. Now, if you start thinking about the word desert, not many countries in the world have a desert. Okay, there's a desert in Australia, there's a desert in Mongolia, there's a desert in Egypt, there's a desert in Bolivia. Okay, there isn't a desert in England. Okay, so not everywhere is going to have a desert. There isn't a desert in Fiji. That means this poem can only be set in certain places. Now, also keep in mind that the question at the bottom says, comment on how the author presents the king, Ozymandias, in this poem. So the reason I put those in red is because if you were to walk into an examination, the first thing you should really do is highlight or underline what the question is asking you to think about. Because what happens is students tend to ignore that and they just start writing, and then the answer that they have written does not match what the examiner is looking for. So that's why I put them in red. Normally they would be in black. Let's look through the poem. So, I met a traveler from an antique land. Now, antique sounds like an ancient land. If anybody studies classical studies in a school later on, they might be looking at the Mediterranean. So you've got to start thinking that an antique land is close to the Mediterranean Sea, typically. And as I mentioned before, there's a desert. So we're kind of giving it away which country we're in, but just to make it clear, this is set in Egypt. So I met a traveler who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone. So when we see the word stone, we understand that he's not talking about a human person he has met. He's talking about a statue. Statues are made of stone. Obviously human beings are not made of stone. So trunkless legs, that means that there's only the bottom part of the legs that can be found. We might, for trunk, a more modern word might be thighs, okay, or your calf muscles, something like that. Stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies. So visage, V-I-S-A-G-E, is a word for face. So even I didn't know that word as an English teacher. How terrible, I had to look that word up. So I'm not sure how you would know that if you're 15. If you do, that's really good. whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command. So we have a lot of negative imagery coming through. Frown, wrinkled, sneer, cold command. Okay, this is somebody who is power hungry. Tell that its sculpture well those passions read. So a sculptor is somebody that has created a statue, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal, these words appear. So a pedestal is basically the bottom of the statue. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. So, King of Kings is sort of a suggestion that this man is very powerful, that he has godlike powers. Ozymandias is the name of one of the most powerful Egyptian pharaohs, called Ramses II. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. So, that is an imperative. Nothing beside remains, round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level stands stretch far away. So we have this idea of decay, this idea of a wreck. Now, what is the point of this poem? The point of this poem is that it matches one of the illusions you have in your green book. So if you think about in your green book, there is a reference to people who are creating something that's tall, and this upsets God, and this tall structure is destroyed. Okay? The idea about this is arrogance. That's essentially what this poem is about. Okay? There's a word beginning with H that I want you to think about. If you look at the front of your illusion booklet, it has this word. Some of you may not know this word, so we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Now, what I want you to think about is what can we say about this poem to answer this question. So in this poem below, the speaker encounters a traveller who recounts a discovery in the desert. Comment on how the author presents the king, Ozymandias, in this poem. So you would have to talk about the fact that this is a statue. It appears to be in a desert, so you could probably say it's in Egypt. That the statue has been destroyed. However, the message on the pedestal suggests that once upon a time, this statue was incredibly strong and powerful, and therefore the ruler, the actual human being, was very strong and powerful. So what does this suggest about power? What does this suggest about the influence of time? Those are really important points to consider. And one more thing I'll say about this poem is that it was written in 1818. So one of the reasons why it was written is because the poet was critical of monarchy, he was critical of religion, so he's criticizing power. During his time, the king in England was King George III. So he was quite a crazy ruler. And during this time in 1818, there was a statue, an Egyptian statue that was coming to the British Museum. So Britain was very powerful during this time, and the British had a habit of looting or gathering up very famous artifacts. So this poet is sort of writing this poem in 1818, nearly 2,500 years after the Egyptians had built the statue. Okay, so as you can see in the bottom left, that is a copy of the head of the statue that remains in the British Museum to this day. So your goal today is to just think about this poem, read it over it a couple of times, and on Friday I will give you much more information. Thank you.